Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are once again going to be taking a look at the Grenke Freestyle Chess Open being held in Karlsruhe, Germany. Now, obviously, I'm here in Japan and on vacation, but nonetheless, the grind never stops. And even though I literally don't care, as you can see on my shirt, we continue to make our content. Now, since I am in Japan and we're so far ahead, it's actually very convenient for making some of these videos. And today, we're looking at the games featuring the five-time world champion Magnus Carlsen. But before we get to the game, I do want to point out that after we look at Magnus, who's been on big rampage in this event, we will be taking a look at the famous future first American world champion Hans Niemann, who is back in action for the first time in many months. Now, Hans dropped out of the recent Freestyle Grand Slam Tour event in Paris. He left no explanation whatsoever. He still has not commented, and I invite you guys, the viewers of this video, to drop your comments and let me know what you think is truly going on or what the reasons are behind Hans choosing to not play. Now, back to the video and back to the turn that we're talking about. In my last video, we saw that Magnus got off to a start of 4 out of 4, a perfect score with 4 great victories. He would win in round 5, and now he gets one of the big matchups in round number 6, where he is playing with the black pieces against one of the most talented American players, A. Wonder Liang. Now, A. Wonder Liang is a name you might not know, but he has actually been playing a lot online in various variants, including Fischer Random, which is why he's doing so well in this tournament with a score of 4.5 points out of 5. So he's a half point behind Magnus, who's on 5 out of 5, and let's jump right into the game. So, Magnus playing with the black pieces, and one thing, as I've said many times, that you want to look at the start of the game is the placement of the pieces and whether there are weaknesses. Now, in this position, if white were to play the move g3, suddenly this pawn on b7 becomes a weakness right away, so you do want to be very careful. Now, that being said, one thing that I do not like, and I've actually been paying some close attention to the games, is there have been many positions where at the get-go, both sides can castle immediately, and honestly, considering that I really like the creative nature of Fischer Random, it kind of diminishes it a little bit, because once the players castle in the first couple of moves, usually positions have the potential to become very regular with normal piece development. Alright, so A Wonder opens with the move knight b3, and Magnus plays c6, opening up the diagonal for the bishop, but also stopping any threats towards his weak pawn on b7. We get the move c3, Magnus plays g6, we get e4, and now Magnus plays the move e5. Here we get the move castles, Magnus castles, and now we get the move d4. Now this move is already a slight mistake. It's not necessarily a terrible move, but one of the things that I've started to realize about Fischer Random when I think about it from a philosophical point of view is that in chess, normally the way you look at it is you think about 1,000 rules and how to break it. My view about Fischer Random chess is that when you play Fischer Random, it's more about sort of just from the get-go, not believing in the 1,000 rules at all. And this is a good example, because here Magnus takes, A Wonder takes back very naturally, and you're thinking immediately, there's a big white center. White has more space. In traditional chess, due to the normal placement of the pieces, this normally would be a good thing, but in Fischer Random, it can lead to disaster, and right away, as we're about to see, after this move f5, white is going to have big trouble maintaining the big white center. Now, had A Wonder played the move knight takes d4, which is a little bit preferable to taking with the pawn, white is considered to be very marginally better after knight e6 and the move f3, but again, basics are basics, and we've all been taught these basics over the many years we've played. So we get takes, f5, e5, and now we get the move knight to e6. Here we get the move h3, and now Magnus plays d6, and already the big white center is collapsing. Black has great placement, the queen on this diagonal, the bishop on this diagonal, the bishop on g8, and on top of that, you have these rooks, which are also in the middle of the board. So white's position is already very perilous here, and it's very easy to lose control. And in fact, I should say, according to the computer, white is already lost. Now, up to this point, Magnus Carlsen has played a perfect game with 99.8% accuracy. So now we get the move bishop h2. Magnus takes, we get bishop takes, and Magnus trades the rooks, and now we get the move knight b6. Now, A Wonder would surely love to take with the rook on d1, but this would simply lose the pawn on e5 and the game with it. So we get king takes, knight b6, A Wonder plays queen h2, trying to guard the pawn, and now Magnus plays move h5. Now the main reason that white is doing so poorly in this position is that black has great knights. These knights on b6 and e6 are well placed. Knight can jump to c4, a4, knight on e6 also potentially has room to jump, and on top of that, this white king can very easily be attacked. So a wonder goes queen g3. Magnus plays bishop f7, we get h4, and now we have the move rook d8 check being played. A wonder goes king c1, and now Magnus plays the move knight c4. This move is a slight mistake according to the computer. The first mistake of the game from Magnus. Had he played this move queen to f8, intending to play queen b4 and then knight c4, for whatever reason, this is simply much better. So we get knight c4. A wonder plays bishop c2. This is a mistake here. White had to go queen c3, trying to attack the horse here. Probably a wonder was worried about queen to h6 check, knight to e3, and this very nasty move, knight to f4 here. This knight is jumping all over the board. There's a big pin if white were to play knight takes knight. There's knight to e2, creating the fossil, as well as a double check and a fork here, and this spells total disaster. So in this position, the reason the computer says that white is not actually lost here is white can play the shocking move knight to c5 here, and now probably a wonder assumed there are many ways for black to win, like knight takes g2, attacking the rook and the knight, but apparently after e6 here, cutting off the connection between the bishop and the knight here, white is back in business. Now, can you really play this as a human? Not likely to do this, just because there's so many different fossils here, and you presume that you're losing the game. But it also, of course, highlights once again how ridiculous computers are. They can show these lines and the fact that everything is playable. So we get the move bishop c2 from a wonder. Magnus plays rook d5 here, attacking the pawn on e5 with the knight, the rook, and the queen. We get queen to c3 here, and now Magnus takes the pawn on e5. Here, white cannot capture what looks like a free pony on c4, because then you would lose the rook on e1. So, in this position, after we get the move rook takes e5, we have knight to e3 being played by a wonder. Magnus goes knight to c7, a very nuanced move here, which makes a lot of sense, because black does have to be a little bit careful. Were you to trade the knights on e3, after rook takes e3, suddenly out of nowhere, this pin of the queen becomes deadly. If black moves the king, you lose the rook, and if you take the rook, you lose your queen in the corner pocket. So the move knight c7 is a really nice touch here, because now the bishop guards the knight, the rook can take the rook with check, and white has no way to take advantage of the pin of the queen. So a wonder does take the knight. A sample line here for white is to play something like knight to d1, but black has many ways to win here, but the simplest one I'll show you guys is quite simply to play queen to e8, guarding the rook on e5. Now, of course, there are other ways to win, like I said, but I want to illustrate why the pin does nothing. So we get knight takes knight. Magnus trades the towers, takes the knight, and at this point, black is up a clean pawn on the c file here in an endgame, and it is Magnus Carlsen at the end of the day. His technique is usually flawless in such situations. So we get the move queen to e3. Magnus plays b6 here, or I should say a wonder, stopping the queen from taking the pawn on a7. We get knight to d4, and now Magnus plays queen f6 here, guarding the pawn on c6, but also targeting the pawn on h4. A wonder plays knight to f3, and now Magnus decides to go for the very committal move bishop takes a2. Now, you might be thinking, black can't take this pawn. It's very risky. After all, the famous first American world champion in reality, Bobby Fischer, actually lost the game in his world championship match against Boris Spassky when he grabbed a pawn on the rim, as his bishop ended up getting trapped. Now, in this case, white can't trap the bishop, because after b3, black goes queen a1, king to d2, and now there's a nice move, bishop to b1, getting rid of this dangerous bishop off of the a2 square, and now black has simply collected 2 free pawns and will win. So here we get the move queen to e5, and now Magnus plays the move queen f7. He does not trade the queens, because then, even though black's up 2 pawns in the endgame, one of these pawns on g6 or c6 is going to fall, and the task of winning is actually just impossible here according to the computer, and white is completely fine. So Magnus goes queen f7. This stops white from playing b3 once again, as black would take the pawn, and without b3, it's just not going to happen. So a wonder plays queen d6. Magnus goes queen c4 here, guarding the pawn, but also pinning the bishop. You have bishop b3, you have queen to f1. A wonder plays queen takes pawn, and now we get the move queen f1. Here we have bishop to d1, and now Magnus plays the move bishop to b3, and after this move bishop b3, a wonder resigns the game, because there is simply no way to guard this pinned bishop. Say you play a move like queen to d6, for example, black can very calmly play this move king to b7, and then after you play a move like queen d2, actually white can guard the bishop, just to be clear, but after white can guard the bishop, black goes knight d5, here everything is tied up. At some point you have to go knight d4, and after takes, black simply has too many extra pawns here and will win the game. Now, of course, as I said, originally I made the mistake of saying the bishop was, you couldn't save the bishop. You can save with queen d6. But like I was saying, at this point, you're going to be losing a lot of pawns. You're just losing all over the place. There's not a whole lot to do. And that's why A Wonder chooses to resign. So with this victory, Magnus now moves to a perfect 6 out of 6 score. Now you might be thinking he's running away with the tournament. However, he does have a close competitor. There's one player remaining on 5.5 points out of 6. That player, of course, is the famous Parham Magsudaloo from Iran, who is on 5.5 out of 6. They are going to be playing in the 7th round game. If Parham can win or draw, the tournament remains very much alive. If Magnus wins another game and gets to 7 out of 7, it is all but over for the rest of the field. Nonetheless, amazing performance from Magnus thus far, and now we're going to take a look at another player who rather mysteriously is back in action. Now, the famous first future American world champion, not in reality, Hans Niemann, is competing in this Grenke tournament. Now, Hans dropped out of the freestyle tournament, as I mentioned at the start of the video. Who knows what's going on? He still has made no comments, but it is good to at least see him playing some chess. So, same starting position in this game. Hans has the white piece here against the famous Armenian Grandmaster Sergei Movsesian. Now, Sergei Movsesian is a player who has not played a lot in recent times. He did cross 2,700 before, and therefore he is someone to be a little bit afraid of. So, Hans plays d4. We get to move d5, and now we have to move castles, and castles happening back. Now, as I said before, one of the drawbacks, I think, with some of these positions is when you castle right away, sometimes the development becomes very steady. So we get c3, c6, knight to b3, and now we have the move g6 being played. Now, already here on move number 5, Hans is a little bit worse according to the computer. Initially, it was saying he's worse here, and the main reason is that black is intending to build a big black center and open things up right away. Hans plays f3, we get f6, knight d2, and now we get the move e5. Hans plays e4, and here we get the move knight d7. Now, in this position, Sergei Movsesian could have played the move knight to b6 here. Had he played this move knight to b6, you would notice we have the classic mirror, mirror on the wall. Both sides are playing the copycat. But we get knight d7 instead. Hans plays the move bishop to f2, and now we get the move knight b6. Hans goes bishop c2, we get bishop c7, and now we have the move queen g1 being played. Now, white is a touch ahead in development here because white does have the bishop on f2 and the queen on g1 on the diagonal, but due to the symmetry here in the center of the board, both sides having their big centers, there is not a whole lot for either side to do. So we get the move bishop to f7. Hans plays h4, and now we get the move queen to f8. Now, of course, Movsesian could have played the move queen g8, simply mirroring on the same diagonal with the queen and bishop, but ultimately he plays queen f8 instead, with the idea of playing queen to h6. Now we get king to b1, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, and here we get the move bishop d5. Now, at this point, a lot has simplified in the center of the board here. Neither side has a center. White has these knights, but on the other hand, the black bishops do have a little bit more scope, potentially, on the two diagonals, so it should offset these knights. So we get the move bishop to b3 from Hans. We get knight e5, queen f1 played, not bishop takes bishop, by the way, because now after knight takes, once again, we have a situation where instead of the big white center and big black center, we get a square of these knights. So here we get queen to f1, Movsesian plays knight c4, and now Hans plays move knight c2. Now, in the course of 2 moves, Hans has gone from being completely equal to a situation where he's actually substantially worse due to black getting this great knife on c4. Now, this, of course, mirrors regular chess, where when you get a knife on f4, f5 specifically, it's considered very dangerous with a queenside castle. Same thing applies with knights on c4, c5. So here we get the move bishop takes knight. In this position, it's worth pointing out that here Hans has to go for bishop takes knight. He cannot take the bishop on e4 because after knight to d2, Hans Niemann's king and queen would get forked. So he takes knight. We get knight takes bishop, queen takes, once again, pawn takes, runs into knight d2. So we get queen c4, and now we have the move bishop d5. Now here, the reason Hans is a little bit worse is that his opponent, Sergei Movsesian, has the 2 Bs very specifically, and the bishops are on good diagonals. So we get queen a4, rook takes, and now we get the move a6 being played. Hans plays queen g4, f5, queen a4 back, and now we get the move queen d6. Hans plays queen b4, and here we get the move queen takes queen. Now, the computer says that after the move queen to h2, black is doing very well due to the sudden pressure on these pawns on the king side. If white plays a move like knight to e3, you can go bishop takes pawn, and after takes, white's king side is completely falling apart. All the material is going to fall off the board. Instead, Movsesian, in typical positional Armenian style, in the spirit of the famous world champion Tigran Petrosian, goes for a simple endgame, and he tries to argue a D's bishops versus the knight and bishop. He is simply better. Now, in many Grandmaster games, the bishop pair is considered the gold standard. If you can get the bishops against a bishop and knight, for example, or two knights, it's considered a substantial advantage if there is no major imbalance in the pawn structure. So here we get the move b3 from Hans. Movsesian goes rook d2, creating the classic kebab on the 7th rank. Hans plays rook f1, and now we get to move bishop to e5, pressuring the pawn on c3. Now at this point, Hans has a slight advantage on the clock, but he is simply getting completely outplayed here. Black has reached a position which, with technically perfect play, should result in a win. So we get the move king to c1, bishop to f4. Hans goes back. If he were to play a move like g3 to attack the bishop, it's spaghetti-o time. Rook takes bishop, check the king. After takes, removing the check, you lose the rook, and you resign the game. So we get king to b1. Movsesian goes back, we get the repetition, and now he plays move a5. Hans goes knight c2, we get a4, and now we have the move king b2 being played to protect the white pawns. Were Hans to take the pawn on a4 after bishop c4, your rook is under attack. If you ever move the tower, you lose the bishop. If you move your bishop to, say, e1, for example, black simply tickles the king and then captures the rook on f1. So we get king to b2 being played here, and now Movsesian plays rook to e2. We get g3, bishop c7, and here Hans plays move c4. Now this move should be a fatal mistake from Hans in this position. Computer prefers f4 here because after bishop d5, you can go bishop to e3 with the idea of rook to f2, and maybe there's still some hope of saving the game. Instead, we get c4. Now, in this position, Movsesian trades the pawns on b3, and this completely changes the dynamic altogether. Now, had Movsesian gone for the exact same plan, but not traded the pawns on b3, he would have gone on to win this game cleanly. Now, what I mean by that is after the move b5, if white plays move king c3, which will be fairly similar to the game, black can trade the pawns on c4, and now after this move bishop to a5, the king is under attack. If you ever play king b2, black can take the pawn on c4. If you move to d3, black will take anyway, or not take anyway, sorry, black goes rook d2 check, and after the king moves, you take the knight, and now you have an extra bishop. Now, the reason this is so important is because in the game, when Movsesian decides to trade and play b5, here Hans is actually able to play the move king c3, and the reason is that because after takes, and bishop a5, now white has the move king to b3, which was not available in the other variation. So just to go back for 1 second, since people probably missed it here, after b5, king c3 takes, and check, this pawn on a4 stops the king from going to b3, whereas in the game, when we get forward to this point, now there are no pawns on a2 and a4 here, so there's no pawn to stop the king. And after king to b3, black is still better here, but it will require a lot of precision. And down 6.5 minutes on the clock here, we get this move rook to d2, which simply throws away most of the advantage for Movsesian. Now, Movsesian should have played the move rook to e7 with the idea of checking the king to try and win the pawn, and the computer still says it's quite good. Who knows what would have ultimately happened, but after we get the move rook to d2, Hans correctly plays the move knight to b4 here. This stops the check on d3, you pressure the pawn on c6, and now if black plays a move like king to b7, for example, white can go bishop to e3. Let's just say you go rook to e2 and bishop f4, and suddenly with both rook to d1 and rook to a1 available, white is very much in the game. Movsesian trades the bishop for the knight, we get to move rook to c2, and now we get to move bishop b6 here. Now this move is also a mistake from Hans. In this position, he should have played the move bishop to e3, and after rook takes pawn, and the move king to a5, white is down a pawn on the c file, but the computer thinks it's possible to draw due to the opposite color bishops. Instead, we get bishop b6. Now, this is the moment where Movsesian decides to play the move bishop takes c4, and this is effectively like offering a draw. Now, the reason that this move bishop b6 is not correct here is that black can play the in-between move pawn to f4, attacking the pawn on g3, and if white takes, after takes, king a5, and rook takes f4, black is still only up the extra c pawn here, but both the pawns on f3 and h4 are under attack from the rook, and with bishop d5 coming as well, it's very questionable whether white can save the game. Instead, Movsesian takes on c4, Hans plays the move rook to f2, and now Movsesian trades the rooks on f2, and the game ends rather prematurely in a draw. Now, were the move rook c1 to be played, white has the move bishop to e3, attacking the rook. Here, this rook struggles to guard this bishop. You can't go here without hanging the rook. Same thing for this square. So both pieces are on pre. Now, black can still save the game after rook to e1, bishop to d2, and this move rook to e2, offering the trade of the bishops. But after takes an f4, the game will result in a draw anyway due to the opposite colored bishops. So after rook takes f2, the game ends in a draw. With this draw, this means that Hans is now on a very mediocre score of 4.5 points out of 6. He has drawn 3 games in the tournament. Things aren't going his way, and for the fans out there, it's looking less and less likely that we might get a matchup between Magnus and Hans in this Grenke tournament. Nonetheless, pretty exciting games going on. I do hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Before we do end, I want to add a couple important notes. It is really amazing that while I'm on vacation here in Japan, the amount of people who have recognized me who are traveling from places like Slovenia, Poland, the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, and Canada is just mind-blowing. It shows how vibrant the chess community is, how many people love this great game, and how international the game has become. Now, of course, when I say that, that means that nobody here in Japan has actually recognized me if they're Japanese, but nonetheless, that is a story for another day, and it's really just great to see how far and wide chess spreads across the world. So on that note, I would again like to thank you guys for watching this video. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps. Obviously, if Magnus continues this run, I'll be doing some more recaps of this tournament. If not, probably I'll dial it back a little bit. But at any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest, I think, of your Sunday morning or afternoon. In the rest of the world, here in Japan, it's Sunday evening, so I'm going to go to bed pretty soon, but I hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.